The evening was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own thoughts. The sun was beginning to set behind the tall trees that surrounded Bill Gates' private lake house. The water shimmered like molten gold under the last light of the day, and a soft wind rustled through the leaves. Bill sat alone on the wooden bench overlooking the lake. His hands resting loosely on his lap, a cup of untouched coffee beside him. To anyone else, this scene would seem peaceful, a billionaire enjoying a rare moment of solitude. But inside his mind, there was a storm. He had just returned from another global summit, surrounded by presidents, CEOs, and visionaries. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and everyone wanted a quote, a photo, a smile. He had given all three, as he always did. But now, away from the noise, he felt something unfamiliar. Something heavy. He whispered to himself, almost afraid of the sound of his own voice. What does happiness really mean, when you've already achieved everything? For decades, that question had never crossed his mind. He was too busy building ideas, building systems, building empires. He was the man who didn't sleep, who outthought competitors, who worked until the lights went out. He chased excellence like it was oxygen. But that night, sitting alone, he realized something. He had spent his life chasing progress, not peace. He remembered a time long ago, before the fame, before the billions, when his dreams were simple. When happiness wasn't measured by how much he had accomplished, but by how deeply he felt alive. Somewhere along the way, that feeling had vanished. His mind drifted to an old memory, one that he had buried for years. A woman, a letter, and a goodbye he never truly processed. Her name doesn't matter now. But her impact still lived in the corners of his heart. She had been there when Bill was just another ambitious dreamer. Long nights, messy desks, cheap coffee, and 1,000 ideas scribbled on notepads. She had loved him not because of what he could become, but because of who he already was. She used to tell him, Bill, one day you'll realize that love isn't a distraction. It's the reason we live. He would laugh, brush it off, and say, maybe one day, after I finish changing the world. But she left before that day came. He didn't even blame her. How could he? He barely had time to notice her absence. There were deadlines, meetings, breakthroughs, and a world waiting for innovation. So, he folded the letter she left behind and buried it in a drawer, next to 1,000 other unfinished things. Years passed. Success grew louder. Awards, headlines, interviews, they filled the silence she had left behind. But every now and then, in the quiet hours of the night, her words echoed through his mind. One day, you'll realize. And that night beside the lake, he finally did. He took out that very letter, creased, yellowed with time, but still readable. Her handwriting was soft and familiar. She had written, I know the world needs you, Bill. And I know you'll give it everything you have. But when the noise fades, I hope you'll still have someone to share the silence with. The silence he was sitting in now, it was exactly the one she had warned him about. He read those lines again and again, his vision blurring. The weight of years, of decisions, sacrifices, and missed chances, pressed against his chest. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to feel human. He whispered softly, I built a world that everyone could live in, except me. He thought of all the people he had met, world leaders, thinkers, scientists, yet the one person who had understood his heart the most was the one he had let go. For most of his life, Bill had defined love through logic. He believed love was about compatibility, timing, mutual goals. But he now understood, love doesn't wait for the perfect time. It is the time. He remembered her laughter, the way it filled a room effortlessly. The way she'd tease him for always being late, yet always forgive him. She'd wait in that same small cafe downtown, 2 cups of coffee on the table, one for her, one for him, even when she knew he wasn't coming. She'd smile when he'd call hours later, breathless, apologizing. "It's okay," she'd say. "I know you're busy changing the world." He thought that was understanding. Now he realized it was heartbreak disguised as patience. The lake shimmered again, and the sky turned from gold to deep orange. The silence wasn't cruel anymore, it was reflective. For the first time, he wasn't running from it. He began thinking about happiness. What was it really? He had seen people cheer his name, quote his words, celebrate his achievements. But none of that had ever felt personal. Happiness, he realized, was never about applause. It was about connection. About feeling seen, not for what you've done, but for who you are. He leaned back, eyes on the horizon, and said quietly, "I think I finally understand what she meant." He smiled, a small, genuine smile. It wasn't regret he felt now, it was gratitude. Gratitude for having felt something real, even if it didn't last. Gratitude for understanding that love wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. In that moment, Bill Gates wasn't the billionaire, the innovator, the global icon. He was just a man, realizing that the greatest measure of life isn't what you build for the world, but what you build inside your own heart. He later shared this realization with a few close friends during a quiet dinner. They noticed he was softer that evening, calmer, almost peaceful. Someone asked him casually, "Bill, what do you think true wealth means?" He paused, took a sip of his drink, and smiled before answering. "If you want to know how rich you are, ask yourself who would sit beside you if you lost everything." The table went silent. They expected him to laugh after that, to lighten the moment, but he didn't. He just looked out the window, lost in thought. That night, he didn't check his emails. He didn't scroll through news updates or charts. He just looked through old photographs, people, places, memories. Some faces had faded from his life, but not from his heart. He found a photo, smiling, sunlight in her hair. He placed it on his desk and whispered, "You were right." The next morning, he woke early, stood by the same lake again, and made a quiet promise to himself to start valuing presence over productivity. He spent more time with his family, reconnected with old friends, and allowed himself to laugh more. He began listening more than speaking. And slowly, the weight he'd carried for decades began to lift. He once said publicly, "Money can't buy happiness." But privately, he understood it differently. Money can buy safety, comfort, and control. But not love, not forgiveness, not laughter at 2 a.m., not someone who chooses to stay when everything falls apart. And that realization changed him, not as a businessman, but as a human being. He learned that happiness isn't found in the noise of achievement, but in the quiet understanding of the people who truly see you. Years later, when asked by a journalist what he would tell his younger self, he smiled and said, "Don't confuse purpose with peace. You can change the world and still lose yourself if you forget to love along the way." The crowd clapped. The journalist smiled. But the meaning of that answer went far beyond words. Because somewhere, deep down, Bill Gates had finally made peace with his past. He no longer chased perfection, he embraced presence. He no longer feared silence, he found meaning in it. And for the first time in his long, extraordinary life, he wasn't trying to change the world. He was simply trying to feel it. The lake shimmered again that evening, the same one that once reflected his loneliness. But this time, it reflected something else, acceptance. Maybe happiness isn't about having it all. Maybe it's about realizing that even the most successful lives are incomplete without love. And that's when he finally understood that his biggest regret wasn't losing love, but taking so long to understand it.